All right, today we're diving into a really unique philosophical text. It's an argument that tries to prove the existence of a greatest creator using, get this, nothing but things we can observe in a series of 8 logical steps. We're going to follow that chain of reasoning from the very beginning all the way to the end.
So, let's jump right in with the huge question the source material puts on the table. This isn't about faith. It's not about belief. It's not about scripture. The whole point is the reasoning. The author is basically asking, can we look at the world around us, apply pure logic, and actually arrive at a solid conclusion about a creator? Let's see how they try to pull it off.
The entire argument is built in 3 main parts. First, we'll tackle the argument from origin, which is all about where everything came from in the first place. Then, we'll get into the argument from design, where we'll look for patterns and purpose in the universe. And we'll wrap up with the argument from life, which suggests there's a kind of hidden hierarchy that connects every living thing.
Okay, let's kick things off with that first theme, the absolute fundamentals of our physical universe, where it all started, why it's always moving, and what powers the whole show. The very first inference starts with a simple, pretty universal observation. Everything seems to come from somewhere. You know, a river has a source. A computer has a factory. Even an idea has a starting point in someone's brain. The basic idea here is that nothing we see just poofs into existence from nothing.
So here's the first logical leap. The author says, okay, if this rule, that everything has a source, applies to everything inside the universe, then it must apply to the universe itself. And if you follow that logic, there has to be one single, ultimate source for everything that is. And that's the entity the text calls the greatest creator.
The second inference is all about motion. The text paints this picture of a universe that's just in constant dynamic movement. And it's not just the obvious stuff like wind. The author points out that even things that look totally still, like a mountain, are actually spinning with the Earth. And down at the atomic level, everything is just buzzing with energy.
And that observation leads to a really fundamental question. If every single movement is just energy being transferred from a previous movement, well, what started the very first one? What gave that initial push? The author argues there had to be some kind of primordial motive power to get the whole cosmic dance started.
For the third inference, the text uses this really powerful analogy to talk about energy. Think about it. A blueprint for a house is just an idea, right? It's a mental image. It only becomes a real physical house when you apply energy to it. You know, labor, materials, all that work. Without that energy, the idea just stays an idea.
So the author takes that house analogy and scales it up to, well, everything. For the entire universe, the ultimate image, to even exist, there must have been some initial blast of energy that wasn't caused by something else. This original, unconstrained energy, the text argues, is the greatest creator.
All right, now we're moving into the second phase of the argument. We're shifting gears a bit from the origin of all this stuff and energy to the actual structure of reality. This part is all about cause, purpose, and what the author sees as a deep underlying order to the universe.
Inference 4 is all about cause and effect, and the author uses this really simple, super relatable example. You don't just get a headache for no reason, right? There's always a cause. Could be stress, maybe you're dehydrated, whatever. That simple truth, they argue, applies to absolutely everything.
The author then takes that logic and applies it on a cosmic scale, basically tracing the chain of why all the way back. Life is here because of Earth. Earth is here because of the solar system is here because of the Milky Way, and so on. This is the text's take on a classic idea in philosophy called the first cause argument. It basically says this chain of cause and effect can't just go back forever. Logically, it has to end somewhere, at a single first cause that started the whole domino chain.
The fifth inference pivots from cause to purpose. It lays out this pretty clear hierarchy in nature. In this view, soil exists to serve plants, plants exist to serve animals, and animals exist to serve humans. It builds this neat little pyramid of purpose that leads to one massive question mark. Okay, then, what is the purpose of us? And the text gives a very direct answer to that question. Following the same logic, just as we might raise livestock to serve our purposes, the author concludes that the purpose of humanity, the very top of this earthly pyramid, is to serve the entity at the top of the cosmic pyramid, the greatest creator. The seventh inference draws this fascinating line between 2 different kinds of order. On one hand, you've got human order, things like our laws, our governments, our company structures. These things are created by us, and we can change them. But then, the author points to what they call a creator's order. These are the unbreakable laws of nature, things like the cycle of birth and death, or the fact that a pack needs a leader. These are presented as fundamental rules of the game that you just can't violate.
So now we're at the final section of the argument, and this is where things get a little more metaphysical. The focus here shifts to the nature of life itself, its structure, and the invisible threads that might just be tying it all together.
The sixth inference really expands on this whole idea of hierarchy and applies it to literally all of existence. The author lays out this graded scale of life, starting with the most basic forms you can imagine, and then climbing up through plants, animals, humans, and even what they call celestial beings. And sitting at the absolute peak of this entire structure is, you guessed it, the greatest creator. The eighth and final inference is a big one. It suggests that all things are connected through two types of signals. First, you have explicit stimuli, everything we pick up with our five senses. But the author argues there's another channel, implicit stimuli. Think of these as subconscious waves of information, like intuition, gut feelings, or premonitions that we sense on some deeper level.
To make this point, the text pulls a great example from the novel Robinson Crusoe. The character gets this really strong, unexplainable feeling that he shouldn't get on a ship. He can't say why, he just knows he shouldn't. He listens to that gut feeling and later finds out the ships he was supposed to be on ran into disaster. The author holds this up as a perfect example of someone sensing those implicit predictive waves.
And if you want an even crazier example, the text tells this incredible story about Freud and Einstein. Apparently, at a dinner party, Freud sent a silent, telepathic command to a psychic, who then, with no words exchanged, got up, walked over to Einstein, and plucked 3 hairs from his beard. It's used as this dramatic proof that commands can be sent and received completely subconsciously.
This whole line of thinking, intuition, premonitions, telepathy, it all builds to one critical question. If we are all basically receivers, constantly picking up on these subconscious signals and intuitive nudges, then who or what is the one sending the signal? And the author's answer is this final, ultimate hierarchy of command. In this model, lower forms of life get their orders from higher ones. So plants from animals, animals from humans, and so on, all the way up this ladder. And by this logic, that ladder has to end at one single, ultimate source of all commands, the greatest creator.
So that's the whole argument. We've gone from the very beginning of the universe, through its design, all the way to this interconnected web of life. Now let's just see how the author ties all 8 of these points into a single, cohesive conclusion.
From that first idea about a first cause, all the way to this final chain of command, these 8 inferences aren't supposed to be separate, standalone points. The author's whole goal here is to build them into one single, interlocking system, what they see as a complete, logical proof.
And that leaves us with one last, big question to think about. In any argument that tries to explain the ultimate nature of everything, where does the path of pure logic stop, and where does a leap of faith have to begin? It's a question that's right at the heart of philosophy, and definitely something worth mulling over. Thanks for joining this explainer.